So let's talk about some of the actions of Echinacea. So as mentioned, it's an immune stimulant, right? It is acutely stimulating all aspects of the immune system, which is really, really great for really any manner of infection. And this is where Echinacea is very, very versatile. So you can combine it with respiratory agents like OSHA, lamatium, elecampane, and that immune stimulation will be driven into the lungs. You can combine it with uva ursi and buchu and pipsissewa and drive it into the urinary tract. You can give it with Oregon grape and wormwood and golden seal, and it's going to go into the intestines. Really, whatever you combine Echinacea with, you're able to, in a way, deliver it to the particular organ system where you want it to act upon. But it is a systemic remedy, so it will be stimulating immunity systemically, and that leads to a whole wide range of uses for this plant. But again, as I was saying earlier, that's kind of, you know, it's like science is great, and it's great when we discover properties about plants, but I feel like it's really important not to pigeonhole herbs, and Echinacea is one of those plants that I think has really become kind of pigeonholed, and really the way a lot of folks use it is like for a cold, you know, where they feel themselves getting sick, so they load up on Echinacea. And you know, there's that old saying of there's no cure for the common cold because the common cold is the cure. Like, if you're pushing yourself too hard in your life, you know, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not eating well, you're stressed out, you're going, you're kind of depleting yourself. Sometimes getting that cold or getting sick and laying you out for a few days is kind of just what you need. It's like forcing you to stop, forcing you to slow down. And one of the things that is a little bit unfortunate about the way people use Echinacea is at the initial onset of any kind of symptom, people start loading up on Echinacea, taking, you know, dropperfuls every 30, 60 minutes. But then they don't couple that with bed rest and kind of slowing it down. So I'll just load up on my Echinacea and keep going. And that can actually, in the long run, be worse for the system because you're not allowing the body to rest and recharge and rejuvenate. You're kind of still overstimulating the system. So we got to be a little bit careful with how Echinacea is used. And I feel like it's one of those plants that I don't want to say is abused, but I feel like it is oftentimes used out of context from a holistic approach to healing, which is listening to the vital force, listening to the wisdom of the body and following it. So that's just my little rant on immune stimulation and I guess some of the, not dangers or risks, but I guess for lack of a better term, I'll use those words associated with Echinacea. Other main action of this plant, this is how this herb was traditionally used in Western herbalism, is as an alterative. So this is an amazing remedy used to purify the blood, purify the extracellular fluids, purify the lymphatics. So I would say it specifically is a lymphatic alterative. And I was kind of explaining how that works a little bit ago, but this is really the traditional usage of Echinacea. It was used for things like blood poisoning, sepsis, like deep levels of infection. People get, you know, an infection and then they start seeing that like red stripe go up a limb, you know, that's a really serious situation. That's traditionally how Echinacea was used, was as a very deep antiseptic remedy to purify the blood of very deep levels of infection. But in conjunction with that property, it's also, you know, in many First Nations cultures that worked with this plant in the plains, it would be kind of classified as a snake medicine because it's used for snake bites. They say there's the signature of it is that the flowering cone kind of in a way can kind of resemble, you know, the tail of a rattlesnake. And so they say any type of poisonous sting or bite, but especially rattlesnakes, brown recluse spiders, black widow spiders, anything where that bite, there's the secretion of some sort of venom or toxin into the blood, Echinacea is key, both topically as well as internally. So the way I was taught to use Echinacea is like, if you get bit by a rattlesnake, drink a whole 1 ounce bottle of Echinacea. If you can, put some on topically while you're on your way to the hospital, right? This isn't like, oh no, you're fine, just take some Echinacea and you'll be all good. Like, you should still go to the hospital if you get bit by a rattlesnake or, you know, even a brown recluse, because a lot of those can be very necrotic venoms that literally like eat away and dissolve tissue, which can be very dangerous. But that's a very traditional usage of Echinacea is for and it's associated with that deep level blood poisoning, basically. So these are some of the main actions that I tend to think of with Echinacea. I don't find it to have very much of like a diaphoretic property, or, you know, it's not a remedy I tend to think of specifically for fever. Which is interesting because it is so pungent and aromatic and stimulant. It's like I taste it and I'm like, oh, I'm surprised it doesn't stimulate sweating, but in my experience with it, it's not really that effective as a diaphoretic. I personally prefer remedies like elderflower, yarrow, things like that. So getting into the energetics of Echinacea. So this is where we see an interesting kind of almost like contradiction, it seems like, with this plant, in that the energetics of this herb, it's actually cooling. So it's very rare that we find a pungent aromatic stimulant herb with a cooling net energetic property. And the only other remedy that I can really think of there is like yarrow is cooling and stimulates circulation. Elderflower stimulates a little bit of peripheral circulation and also is cooling. But a lot of our circulatory stimulants are hot plants: cayenne, ginger, prickly ash, black pepper, a lot of the aromatic mints. So Echinacea is a cooling stimulant, right? Very, very unique property, very useful property, especially in the sense that typically when there's infection going on like that, there's also a lot of inflammation. So Echinacea is really great because it's going to purify the blood, purify the lymph, stimulate the immunity, help support the body in fighting off the infection, cool down the inflammation in the localized tissue, and in that way, ultimately shorten the lifespan of that initial infection. So this is an herb that I really love formulating with because it's so versatile. You know, it's kind of like lobelia. It's like it works systemically, but you can drive it into a particular organ or system or tissue based on how you formulate with it. So that lends this plant a lot of versatility. I think it's a must-have plant in your home first aid kit, a travel first aid kit, anytime you're on the road or anything like that. It's always a good idea to have a bottle of Echinacea on hand. And the powder as well is really useful for those topical uses as well. And so cooling, stimulant, it is going to be a bit more on the drying side. And in that way, it is really good for alleviating kapha and pitta. So kapha being dampness, accumulation, stagnation. Anytime there's an excess moisture accumulation in the body and basically toxicity accumulation, it's really good. That's really when we use alteratives, coupled with an excess of pitta or heat, inflammation in the tissues, and things like that. So that's typically how I think of it from the perspective of the doshas. But of course, you know, and this is one thing, just a little side note, I get this question all the time from students, and people tend to get really confused in regards to like the doshas of Ayurveda and constitutional models and herbs and energetics. So people like, oh, well, I'm a Vata constitution, but I've got this really damp condition in my body, but I don't want to take these herbs to treat the damp condition because it'll aggravate the Vata. And this is really, really important for everyone to understand, is that when there is an acute situation, you kind of ignore the constitution in a way. Like, there's the whole constitution of the person, but then each organ system and tissue has its own constitution. And it's very important that you treat what's right in front of you. And they say that in Ayurveda, you know, you have prakriti, your core constitution of the whole being, and then you have the vikruti, or the assumed constitution, or the imbalanced state. And that also exists within an organ. So even if you're a vata, cold, dry, tense person, and you've got a really damp, phlegmatic cough, you don't really have to worry about giving a drying expectorant aggravating your vata constitution, because acutely you have dampness and too much kapha in the lungs, so you treat that. So it's a little side note, but it is a question that I get a lot, and it seems to be a really big point of confusion amongst the herbalist community that are working with constitutional systems, trying to understand their own constitution and how to work with the herbs in that model. So that's just a little side note there on that. So these are some of the ways that I like to work with Echinacea and how to understand it holistically, its core properties. And